Welcome to Habeas Treasurist, where I try to decipher this book, There's Treasure Inside by Jon Collins-Black, in order to find one of the 5 hidden treasures. On today's episode, I'll continue my breakdown of The Lion's Share Box and discuss where I think the multiple Star Trek references in the book might be taking us. Let's hit it! In my previous videos about the Michael Jordan chapter, I explore the possibility that JCB uses the main subject of the chapter to direct us to find a clue in something adjacent. For instance, near the end of the chapter, it appears that the author might be making some steak references with these lines. This got me wondering if one of the takeaways, or clues from the chapter, might be a different basketball player, Kobe Bryant, since he is named after the exclusive, highly sought-after Kobe beef from Japan and therefore fits the best in class and Be Like Mike titles of the chapter. Now, after making this connection, I began wondering if other chapters might be structured the same way. So I started looking for adjacent clues that would tie in the titles of the chapters to their main subjects. And that's what we're going to discuss today, specifically the Andrew Carnegie and Moon Rock chapters in the book and how I think both have ties to Star Trek. So let's begin a second time. One of the things that has intrigued me about the Andrew Carnegie chapter is the subtitle, The Science of Giving. I think it's likely that at least one important clue from the chapter is going to tie directly to this phrase. The other thing that struck me as odd, and therefore likely a clue, is the opening of the chapter where the author is commenting on the notes his editor has sent him about the treasure book. He writes, "I have a good editor. He is excellent at what he does. He's been part of a #1 bestseller, and I respect his opinion. So when he sent me his first round of notes for this book, I was excited to read them. Immediately, one of his comments jumped out at me." Okay, let's stop here for a moment. What strikes me as odd in this paragraph is the first sentence, "I have a good editor." It doesn't exactly read as a ringing endorsement. Now, in fairness, JCB makes up for it in the next sentence by writing, "He is excellent at what he does." But why start off calling him good in the first place? Why not just say, "I have a great editor," or "I have a fantastic editor," especially if you are trying to compliment him? Now, this might seem like I'm nitpicking, but that's what I do. And JCB has already established himself as a nice person who cares about other people, especially his family and the people who helped with the book. The acknowledgement pages at the end of the treasure hunt book read as effusive praise for everyone who took part in helping to bring this project to life. So why would JCB tone down his praise for his editor in the opening sentence of the Carnegie chapter? It just feels off. Well, I think he may have done it on purpose in order to leave us a clue. I believe it's possible that he deliberately chose the word good and also intentionally let us know that he respects him in order to establish his editor as a good man. You see, I don't think it's just a coincidence that he uses his editor's notes to start off the Carnegie chapter. I think he might be directing us to Carnegie Hall in New York City and a specific performer or performance that took place there. That could be why JCB uses the words punchline and denouement shortly after in the chapter. These words stand out as unusual in the context of the chapter itself, but fit much better if you think of them as words you would use to describe a part of a concert hall stage performance. Okay, but I know what you must be thinking. Yo, HT, didn't Carnegie Hall open up in like 1891? How are you going to know which performance is a clue? It's a great question. Well, luckily for me, Carnegie Hall has a website where they highlight iconic performances from the past 130 years, and one immediately jumped out at me. It's now referred to as Benny Goodman's famous 1938 Carnegie Hall jazz concert. It's credited with bringing jazz into the mainstream. Could Benny Goodman be the reason JCB refers to his editor as good? I think so, and here's why. The 1938 jazz concert at Carnegie Hall was recorded and released as a record. The record went on to be a #1 bestseller with over 1 million copies sold. Also, I like the musical connection that's implied by the phrase, "He sent me his first round of notes." And finally, the second song on the album is called 1 O'Clock Jump, which sounds a bit like the sentence immediately, one of his comments jumped out at me. Also, I should probably point out that we know from the jazz references in the Pokemon box chapter that JCB is familiar with jazz, maybe even a fan, and so it's not out of the realm of possibility that there are some jazz clues also in part 1 of the book. Okay, so how does making a Benny Goodman jazz concert connection help us find the treasure? And how does it help us explain why the chapter is subtitled The Science of Giving? Well, maybe if JCB is making one famous Carnegie Hall concert reference in the first paragraph of the chapter, then he could be making another concert reference in the second paragraph where he cites his editor's notes on the book. Let's read that part now. These treasure hunt items seem so extravagant that I wonder if readers will ask if you're putting them on. You're giving away extraordinarily rare and expensive prizes? There's no punchline to this, only because it goes so strongly against human nature. His question felt important, and I pondered it for a while. Was there a punchline to this treasure hunt? It's not a word I would have used to describe any denouement around here. Okay, there's a lot here, but the two words that stick out to me the most are punchline and denouement. Punchline is typically a word you would hear associated with comedians and jokes. And the official definition of a denouement is the final resolution or untangling of the complexities in a plot occurring after the climax of a story. Denouement comes from the French word for untying or unknotting. So basically, we have a possible reference to a comedy or comedian and something to do with bringing closure or wrapping something up. So I returned to the list of iconic performances at Carnegie Hall and filtered for comedians. Specifically, I was searching for a comedy performance that was on the list because of how it ended. I figured the ending had to be special or unusual for JCB to use the word denouement. I found two performances that fit the criteria. The first was Andy Kaufman's performance from 1979. Andy's comedic style was very unusual. He liked performing his various characters and goofing on the audience. The audience never quite knew what was real or not. And in his Carnegie Hall show, Andy promised the audience that, if they were good, he would take them all out for milk and cookies after the show. And sure enough, when he finished on stage, he told the audience that there were 24 buses waiting outside to take everyone to go get milk and cookies. And after the milk and cookies, he told everyone the show would continue on the Staten Island Ferry the next day. I think Andy's comedic style fits with the editor's comments wondering if the readers will ask if you're putting them on. After all, Andy died from lung cancer in 1984, and some people still think he may have faked his own death as a joke and are waiting for him to reappear. You never knew with him what was real and what was not. I also like the possibility that Andy Kaufman is the clue we were supposed to find because of the song and movie titled Man on the Moon that was made about his life starring Jim Carrey. The Carnegie chapter and the Moon Rocks and Meteors chapter are back to back in the book, so maybe the clue we were supposed to find fits both chapter topics. And that concept also works for the second comic performance with a strange ending that I found in my Carnegie Hall research. In 2016, comedian Tig Notaro performed at Carnegie Hall, and at the end of her set, she spent 15 minutes teasing the audience about bringing out the band, the Indigo Girls. Apparently, this was a running joke that Tig was known for. At every stop on her comedy tour for the previous 6 months, Tig would pretend that the Indigo Girls were there and make an announcement, "Please welcome to the stage, the Indigo Girls," but they would never appear. So at each location across the country, the audience was always left wondering, maybe tonight's the night they will actually be here. But despite spending a good portion of every show hyping up the impending arrival of the band, the Indigo Girls never appeared. Well, that all changed at Carnegie Hall. After doing her normal audience teasing for about 15 minutes, the stage lights dropped and the music began. The Indigo Girls had in fact appeared, and the crowd went nuts. The band performed 5 songs that night while Tig sat on the stage and watched. So why do I think that this could be the performance that JCB is referencing with the punchline and denouement phrases? Well, for a couple of reasons. One is that denouement means untying or unknotting, and Tig's last name has "not" in it. Okay, that's not that great, pun intended, but how about this one? Tig Notaro is also on Star Trek. She played the character Jet Reno on Star Trek Discovery from 2019 to 2024. Why do I think this is important? Well, if we turn to the end of the Carnegie chapter, we find a paragraph about the Hooker telescope that Carnegie funded at the Mount Wilson Observatory in California. The language that JCB uses to end the chapter sounds very Star Trek-like. It reads, "Today, we stand on the edge of a new frontier, one that will lead us further out into our universe than we have ever gone before." And then, of course, the next chapter starts off with the famous opening line from Star Trek talking about the final frontier, and JCB explaining that Star Trek Captain Jean-Luc Picard was his television hero. Well, let's return to the Hooker telescope paragraph for a moment. It reminded me a bit of the Muhammad Ali transition that ties the two Olympic Games chapters together, sort of a standalone story that acts as a bridge. It's different than the typical transition John does between chapters, and I think that means the clues from the two chapters, they may connect. Here's what I mean. William Shatner was the original captain on Star Trek back in the 1960s. And in the 1980s, he starred again in his own TV show where he played a veteran police sergeant called, get this, T.J. Hooker. The show ran for 5 seasons. I find it interesting that John goes out of his way to mention the Hooker telescope right before launching into praise about a former captain on Star Trek. I think, just like how in the Michael Jordan chapter, the clue might be MJ adjacent, meaning Kobe Bryant, maybe JCB is using the Hooker telescope to go Jean-Luc Picard adjacent and reference a different Star Trek captain, William Shatner's Captain James T. Kirk. After all, William Shatner did fly into space in 2021 as part of a Blue Origin space tourism flight, and space tourism is mentioned at the beginning of the Moon Rock chapter. And when he returned, Shatner talked about how he experienced the overview effect. He got all emotional, which JCB also describes in the chapter. Here, let's watch.
What you have given me is the most profound experience I can imagine. I'm so filled with emotion about what just happened. It's extraordinary.
And the company that took William Shatner into space, Blue Origin, was founded by Jeff Bezos of Amazon, who, like Carnegie, spent multiple years being the richest person in the world. But I think the Carnegie connections may run even deeper. Jeff Bezos got divorced in 2019, and his wife received over $38 billion in the divorce settlement. Now, she immediately pledged to give all of this money away and has been doing an amazing job at that. She's already donated over $26 billion personally to various charities so far. So she is definitely following Carnegie's famous phrase that appears in the treasure book, "The man, or in this case the woman, that dies thus rich, dies disgraced." And maybe the biggest coincidence with Andrew Carnegie, who was notably born in Scotland, her name is Mackenzie Scott, which would make her another famous Scott philanthropist. And this might be taking things a bit too far, but the other Star Trek character mentioned in the treasure book is in Chapter 1, Montgomery Scott, or Scotty as he's often called, who just happens to speak with a Scottish accent. So to recap, we have Andrew Carnegie, who was a native Scot born in Scotland. We have Mackenzie Scott, and we have Scotty from Star Trek. We also have a reference to Michael Scott, who ran Apple in Chapter 1, which at one time was the most valuable company in the world. And we have the potential connection to Mackenzie Scott's ex-husband Jeff Bezos, who, like Andrew Carnegie, was once the richest person in the world and founded Amazon, which, like Apple, was once the most valuable company in the world. A lot of similarities and connections. Lots of Scots, 2 most valuable companies in the world, and 2 richest people in the world. So at this point, you must be asking yourself, yo HT, I get the Star Trek connection, but how does this tie back to comedian Tig Notaro? Great question. Well, in her role as Jet Reno on the Star Trek Discovery TV show, her character is an engineering officer on the ship, very similar to the role Scotty played as chief engineer on the original Star Trek TV show. And if JCB wanted to drop a subtle location clue for the treasure box using her character's name, Jet Reno, it would be a pretty clever way of directing hunters to Nevada, a wonderful state with no personal income tax, as I mentioned in an earlier video, which makes it a great place to find a treasure. The other reason I feel like this line of thinking might be on the right track is these connections between Star Trek and famous philanthropists like Carnegie and Mackenzie Scott would make the title The Science of Giving make a lot of sense. Okay, but I think it's fair to ask at this point, how does any of this even remotely tie back to Benny Goodman? Well, who knows? But if one of the takeaways is that there are a lot of Scott clues between the two chapters, then maybe there's a potential Scott connection to Benny Goodman and his 1938 Carnegie Hall concert. So, I reviewed the song list that he performed that night at Carnegie Hall, and sure enough, there was only one Scottish song on it. The song is called Loch Lomond and starts off with the popular lyric, "You take the high road and I'll take the low road, but I'll be in Scotland before you." These highs and lows reminded me a bit of the verses in Joyce's Serenade, but what really got me interested is the lyrics to Loch Lomond also mentioned Ben Lomond, which sounded really familiar to me. Well, it turns out that back in 2022, the Utah treasure hunt treasure was hidden on Ben Lomond Peak Trail just north of Salt Lake City. Now, you may remember that I connected Salt Lake City to a clue from the Michael Jordan chapter in an earlier video. Small world. Probably just a coincidence, but one of the cool things I learned in the Utah treasure hunt was the word Lomond in Scotland means beacon. So Ben Lomond means Beacon Mountain, so it might be worth pointing out that the line in Joyce's Serenade, "Our conductor, as with a trace of a baton through the air, gives direction," could actually line up with an orchestra like the Benny Goodman Orchestra playing a song about a beacon that gives direction, aka Loch Lomond. Again, probably not of significance to the hunt, but I also learned that Ben Lomond in Utah was the original inspiration for the Paramount Pictures mountain logo. Now, it would be really cool if JCB is including references to Paramount films like Indiana Jones and Tomb Raider and Mission Impossible, not because the movies or actors are clues, but instead because the Paramount logo is. Oh, did I mention that Paramount's #1 franchise of all time happens to be Star Trek? As Lieutenant Sulu, aka George Takei, would say, "Oh my, these are some strange coincidences indeed." And if you have time for one more, try this one. I decided to look up the original Ben Lomond, Loch Lomond area in Scotland that the song was written about just to get an idea of where it's located. Here's what I discovered on Google Maps. Here's Loch Lomond and Ben Lomond, and just a short distance away is a place called Comer, which, if I remember correctly, is JCB's original last name. Now, of course, this is probably just a coincidence, and just one of those things you stumble across by exploring enough rabbit holes, which I've done. Because I think it's more likely that if JCB did hide the treasure somewhere near Ben Lomond in Utah, that he would try to work in the name of the county where the mountain is located as a clue. After all, in a book the size of the treasure book, he would have had plenty of opportunities to slip a reference or two in to help guide hunters to the correct final destination. Okay, so the county name where the mountain is located in Utah is Weber County. It's where Weber State University is located. However, it's often mispronounced as Weber County because it shares the same spelling as the popular Weber Grill Company. This, of course, brings us all the way back to these initial potential state clues from the Michael Jordan chapter that I mentioned earlier in the video. Kobe! Anyway, that's all I've got for today's video. Hope you found it interesting and that it helps you with your hunt.